Welcome all to this webinar by Drillity Consulting, and we'll be talking about DevOps today. And as we all know that DevOps is being widely adopted in the industry today across all IT organizations. So the attempt of the webinar today was: Are we adopting DevOps in a correct manner? What is DevOps about? Where did it come from? What's the essence of DevOps? So the webinar tries to answer those queries. So to begin with, as I mentioned, please, all of you are welcome back. Welcome to this webinar. So let's start. So when we talk about DevOps today, right, unfortunately, it has become what this PPT or this image represents. It's all about tools. So whenever we go and talk about, they talk about um, the GitHub, they talk about the Jenkins, they talk about Chef Puppet, they talk about the Salt Stack, but is it what exactly DevOps is, or is this image the true representation of DevOps? That's where we like to differ, and we would like to give a different perspective as to what DevOps is actually about. So DevOps is actually about three things: people, processes, and tools. But as I mentioned, unfortunately, it has become more about tools nowadays. So let me explain to you, how did DevOps start and where did it come from. So DevOps, how was the DevOps moniker formed? So it was taken from two gentlemen named Devanand and OP Sharma, and their first names and last names were taken, and then we came up with DevOps. Just kidding, guys. It's not this one. So let me actually tell you how it came into existence. So it all started in year 2007 in Belgium, where a guy named called as Patrick Dubois, who was working in an organization, and he had a habit of working in different LOBs or different technical areas at all the time. So he wouldn't stay in one technical or one particular area all the time. So he would be 6 months into QA, he would go then into development, then he would go into automation. So he used to move around a lot in the organization and try to learn all the aspects of how things run in the organization. And that is where he got his first challenge, when he was told to do a migration for data center, and that became a very big challenge for him, and he struggled a lot to come up with how we should go about doing the data migration, because there, first of all, he found a lot of resistance from developers, then he found the resistance from operations, then he found people were not willing to change. So he actually encountered a lot of resistance, and he was looking to find a way of how do we address these. So in year 2008, there is another gentleman called as Andrew Schaefer. So he was going to give a presentation on something called a birds of feather. That was supposed to be a radical idea at that time. And what he did is he just did a check-in before the conference was, or his talk time was supposed to begin, and he asked how many people have registered for my conference, and he was told only one. And as it was going to be, it it stood cancelled. But that one person who was supposed to, or who was already in the hall waiting for this guy Andrew Schaefer to speak, was Patrick Dubois. And that's where they met, and they became good friends, and they started to take this discussion further. How can development and ops, or development and operations team, work together and come up with a good solution and help things move smoother and easier, in an easier way. So in 2009, there was a conference called Velocity, and one of the talks of that conference was 10 deploys was per day. This was actually being done in an organization called as Flickr, and that was a radical thing in those days, because even doing one deploy took so much effort and time. And when somebody says we are doing 10 deploys per day, it was a radical thought. So both Andy Schaefer and Patrick Dubois went to this conference and heard about the concept and understood how the organization was going about doing the 10 deploys per day. And in later in year 2009 in Belgium, we had a DevOps Day conference, which was actually hosted by Patrick Dubois, and all the developers and all the operations guy from the world were invited to this DevOps Day conference. Now, one thing happens is where they were trying to do a hashtag DevOps Day conference in Twitter, and because of the limitation of Twitter in those days, you could not put everything. You could not mention the whole name as DevOps Days. They wanted to do a hashtag DevOps Days, but because of the uh, alphabet limitation, they had to remove devs and they'd put hashtag DevOps. And that's the day when, ladies and gentlemen, when DevOps was born, or the name DevOps actually came into existence. We still, till date, every year have this DevOps Days conference in different countries, in India too. So this is a big conference where people from all the development background and the operations background come together and talk about the stuff that is happening in the market today. But this was just to give an intention. This was just from an intention of giving you a idea of how DevOps came into existence and actually how did the DevOps name come into existence. So continuing on, we move on to the next PPT. This is what the pre-DevOps world was. We had silos in our organization, in our IT world. Silos from strategy perspective, design perspective, transition perspective, operation perspective, continual improvement perspective. And what used to happen was they were expensive to maintain. They were slow in doing work. They didn't used to talk to each other. And particularly if an issue arises, then always this finger pointing used to happen. So uh, it was a difficult proposition to maintain in the IT world at that time, and because of this, lots and lots of projects were failing. So what happens is to improve upon this situation, in comes Agile. So what it does is it takes folks from each silos and forms a team, and we call it as a cross-functional team. That's what agile or scrum teams are nowadays. So we have folks coming from different backgrounds forming a team, and that's what is a cross-functional team all about. But what agile also forgets is even though it forms a cross-functional team, it forgets folks from the operation team. The operation team doesn't get included in that, and that's where we start running into issues. So what happens nowadays is because of this, because of because of the situation where we forget about the operations team, we get into this situation. We do our work, we get the product backlog, we create sprint backlogs, we work on them diligently and work on the sprints, create the um, working software, and then we wait and then we hand it over to the operations team. Now, what happens is operations team has their own calendar. So it doesn't go usually live as soon as the code is handed over to them. So they have their own calendar. So it might be something that might happen after 15 days, or they might go live after 30 days. They might go live after 2 days. They might go live after 3 months, once in a quarter. So you do not know as a team once you have given over the work to the operations team. I have hardly seen anybody care or bother about, hey, what happened about the code that we were working on, or that the product or the functionality that we delivered for that particular release by working in sprints. So it's all left upon the operations guy. Okay, now it is in operations. code, so they will take care of it from there. So that's an issue right now, because say after 3 months the operations guy find some production issues, and I understand we have production support team and all of that, but ultimately it comes back to the developer. Hey, what did you do? What would you do in the code? Can you fix it for us? What was the thinking behind the code? So by this time, if somebody is coming to them after 3 months, they have already moved on to new projects, working on something new, and now they have to look into the code again. They have to spend time again and understand the functionality. So it's time lost, and time lost is always directly proportional to money lost. So this is what the reality of our IT world today, and that is where DevOps is needed and is the need of the hour. And why we are failing is because of lack of planning and involvement. That's the biggest reason why DevOps is needed. So what is happening currently is there is a wall of confusion that is getting created between this agile teams and the operations team. So your the development team is just throwing over the work over the wall to the operations team. Operations team doesn't have any inkling of what is going about in the project, what is the project about, what are what are the things that are related to the project. So they have no inkling about it. So there is a wall of confusion that stays between the development team and the operations team. So what happens is if something goes wrong and the website is down or something crashes, it's the operation guys are the first people who get the call. Go and have a look. What happened? Why did it fail? And in our IT industry, it is called as the dreaded 3 a.m. call. So that poor guy comes at 3 a.m. in the morning, starts looking into the reason as to why things have failing or have crashed, and then realizes, you know what? It's a development issue. But since the operations guy is not a developer guy, they are not in a position to take any decisions or are not in a position to do anything about the issue that they have found. So they have to wait for the developers to come in the morning, and the developers will then start working on it, and then they will again get into the production. So again it boils down again to time lost. What if we ask is if the operations guy was in a position to understand what the issue was, and if the operations guy has understood what the issue was, they would have also been in a position to fix it. If that was the case, then we would not have lost so much time. They would have worked on the issue, they would have resolved the defect or whatever minor defect that they found and put the code back into production. So DevOps again comes from that concept of what if. So what are we actually looking at right now? So as I mentioned, we are in silos. So Scrum team are focused on delivery and speed, and operations team is focused on stability and reliability. So they have a lot of things on their plate. Operations guys are always busy, and they have as they have too much stuff on their plate. So it is very very important for us to get them into our process too. So but how we do about it, we'll come to that in the upcoming slides. So anything goes wrong, the blame game starts. Developers do the development, throw their code to the operation guy team, and forget about sprint. Operation team gets everything ready for the production deployment. If anything goes wrong, they get the dreaded 3 a.m. call. So now, since they don't know anything, as I mentioned, so after the dreaded 3 a.m. call, it is all about pointing fingers. Hey, you did this wrong. You didn't do this well. It wasn't deployed properly. So that blame game and pointing fingers start. And what happens is that because of this, there is a lack of trust between the developers and the operations guy. Hey, I don't completely trust that guy. I don't know about that guy. I don't know about that team. We cannot depend on that team. we do not trust that team. So all of this come into picture. So it doesn't have to be in this way. There must be a way of how we can go about it and how we can do things cordially and as a team. This is what we want to achieve. Developers and system admins have trust among themselves. What we actually want developers to do: create servers with code, deploy apps completely, updates smoothly. What would we like as system admins to do? Manage servers regardless of quantity, share duties with developers, work normal hours. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the concept of DevOps. This is what DevOps is all about. This is what DevOps actually means, that developers are in a position to do something from operations perspective. Operations guys are in a position to do something from development perspective, and that is where we get that is where we realize the true essence of DevOps. So coming to the definition of DevOps, I it cannot be a technical definition, because DevOps is all about a cultural change. It's a culture. It's a culture. It's as agile. It's again a change in mindset. It's a cultural change. It's a mindset change. So what it says is, it's a, as I mentioned, cultural and mindset change, and expects collaboration and effective communication between developers and operation team to work together towards delivering the software solution and finally maintaining it. So you have to realize it's an ideology, it's a culture. So sometimes I find it funny when we see on some uh, job positions that are out there on the internet and saying we need a DevOps manager. It's really amazing, because DevOps, when you say it's not a product, it's a ideology, it's a cultural change. How can you assign a role to it? So that's why I say one has to realize what DevOps is all about, and then only we can go about doing it in a correct manner. Agile manager, DevOps manager, they don't make sense. Those roles don't make sense, because when Agile is a cultural change, DevOps is a cultural change, you cannot give a role to it. So that's what we have to realize. DevOps actually is a cultural change. It's a change in mindset. What it actually says is, it says, let's follow an INT model. And we have different models that have come up lately. But it says we all are SMEs of our own skill set. But let's do one thing. Let's do more than that. Let's learn something new. It doesn't say become the SME of it. If you can, well and good. But it says let's learn something new other than the skill set that we have. So it talks about I actually adopting a T model. So this is a good thing from a professional perspective also, and this is what the companies and the organizations talk about when they talk from an upskilling perspective. Hey, when you're upskilling, do this stuff, do that stuff. So so it's basically a T model. So you are SME of your own subject and you are learning new things too. So that's what it says. So the T model, when we apply it to DevOps, that's what it means, that developers should learn something about operations, and the operations guy should learn something about development. Don't become SME of the, or it doesn't say you should become SME of the whole thing, but at least you should learn something from a development perspective, and you should learn something from a operations perspective. So what DevOps is not, it's not an unholy union of developers and equipment. It's not a product. It's not a myth. It's not about developers getting production access, and it's not an exclusive club. So these are the things that DevOps is not. So what it says is, let's bring down the wall of confusion, guys. Let's bring it down and let the operations team in. Let's have them give the feedback. Let's hear what they're trying to do. Let's hear what they're trying to implement. What is their team about? What is their plan? So it says, let's bring down that wall of confusion and let's get the DevOps or the operation guys in. And then there is, every organization has their own model that they follow. So you can go about it in this manner. We have continuous planning, continuous integration, continuous release, continuous monitoring, continuous testing, continuous release and deployment. So this is the this is one of the way that you can adopt or have a DevOps extension to Agile. But why I am showing this PPT is, how do we get operations guy involved on a daily basis or into a Scrum team? How do we get them? So there are various stages, various ways that we can do it. First of all, the most important starting point is by including all the stuff that the operations guys need to do from a project perspective, and including all of them into product backlog as NFRs. NFRs are something that all of us forget, or usually many projects forget, and they do not include them in product backlog, and hence they don't get looked into. So the best way is to start it is get those NFRs from the operations team and put it in the product backlog. That's the first way. Then have the things that are needed to be done from an operations perspective in definition of done. We have definition of done which we come up as an agreement as a team. So product owner has their own things, the scrum master has their own thing, and the development team has their own checklist. When you have an operations guy onto the development team, have them put things from definition of done perspective. So that way we ensure things are getting done. Sprint planning and daily stand up, they are and they have to be part of sprint planning. How does it help? Because now they know, they understand what is the product about, what is the requirement about, when is the release going to end, how many sprints are there, what is the plan actually about, how are we going to execute it. So that way they are having an end date in mind, so that they can start focusing on getting things in place from the end date perspective. Secondly, when they do any sort of work, they have to be part of daily stand-up calls, because they'll also be working on a daily basis along with the team, whether with a developer or doing it independently, but they will still be doing work on a daily basis. And when they are doing a work on daily basis and they are part of Scrum team, they surely have to be part of daily Scrum. So that's where they also talk about the three questions, and everybody will be aware of how things are progressing from an operations perspective. What are the impediments they are facing? How are those impediments going to be resolved? So product owner is also informed on a daily basis as to how things are progressing. Then we have sprint reviews or the sprint demo. So every 2 weeks or 3 weeks of sprint, the operations guy have to demo what they have done in that particular sprint to the stakeholders, shareholders, product owner, and to the whole team. So again, there is a visibility and transparency coming into picture, where everybody is aware, hey, how are things progressing from an operations perspective? Are we going to be ready to go live as soon as we finish the release date? So when we talk about continuous deployment, right? Continuous deployment means we should be ready to deploy in next 1 hour, next 2 hours, in 1 day, in 3 days, in 15 days. How do we ensure that? So that continuous deployment is the mantra that is um, feeding this approach. Scrum of scrums. So if you have dependency on other teams, talk about it. Call a scrum of scrum. Actually, a best practice is to have a scrum of scrum call every week, and that is where you can take the dependencies to your scrum master, and the scrum master will actually talk about those dependencies to other Scrum Master, and whatever is a dependency from an operations perspective also gets discussed and gets addressed, and the operation guys get informed about it, and they can take action as per it. Plan alignment, as I talked about plan alignment, they are very much aligned with the plan as to how things are going to progress, what is going to happen, when is the release date, how many sprints are required, what are the things that are involved from that release perspective. So they are well informed beforehand, and take they take up the action items, or they come up with the user stories in that particular manner. And then they have a few metrics that they can meet and keep for everybody to observe. So we have release date adherence, percentage increase in number of releases, time taken for a release to production, defect attributable to platform support requirements, percentage of NFRs met. These are something that the operations team would mention or keep with them. So this is how we can get those operations team involved. So now this is where we uh, have talked about the two aspects out of the three, which is people and process. So we have people involved. It is important for them to change their mindset. We talk about T model. So when we talk about T model, it is about changing your mindset. We see people are reluctant to change. They don't want to learn anything about operations, and operation guys say, hey, why should we learn about development? But you have to realize the world is quickly changing, and many of the skill sets will vanish soon. So if we do not upskill ourselves sooner, uh, we will not have a relevance in this one. So it's very important to for us to upskill, and the team model is one way to go about it. That's from a people perspective. Then we have a process perspective as to how can the dev team and the operation teams gel together and work together. So now operations guys are working with the dev team in the, as you saw on the last 2 or 3 slides that we talked about. That's how the operations team can get involved. The the flip side or the other side of it is, how does the developer learn about operations? So what you have to realize is, with the advent of tools nowadays, it has become easier to do production deployment. So you type in just one line of code, hit enter, and the code gets deployed across 1,000 servers or nodes or into production environment. So it is not difficult for a developer to learn how that single code of line or single line of code works. And if they that's where it comes back again down to the mindset. If they are of that positive mindset, they learn that single line of code from the operations guy, and the next time if anything needs to be taken to the production, they can go ahead and do it. A developer on the other hand can learn sorry, the operations guy on the other hand can learn something about development by following a practice from extreme programming called as pair programming. So what they can do is they can team up with the developers, just follow what how the developers are coding, what sort of coding they are using, what are the technology using, how are they approaching the functionality, what is the process that they use to approach functionality, how are they doing estimations, and they can learn that thing. See, what we have to realize is the operations guy also come from technical background, so it's actually not too difficult for them to learn a little bit of coding or understand how coding is done. So tomorrow when they get this dreaded 3 a.m. call and they come into office and they look into the code, they see that, hey, you know what, there is just a simple um, bracket missing, and for that I don't need to call the developer, and they just can put in the bracket, hit enter, and everything runs smoothly and put it back into production. So they are in that position to do that only when they learn from the developers how the coding was done, what are the coding standards used, and what is the coding all about. So that is how it helps, and that's the true essence of DevOps people. That's what it is all about. Developers learn something about operations, operations guys learn something about development. So let's now talk about a little bit about the third aspect, tools. let's not become bottlenecks. Let's not use outdated tools. Um, let's not be unwilling to learn. Let's learn new things, and let's not have policies which become bottleneck. So these are the things that are usual bottlenecks in an organization. So the tools that we were talking about, say if we have a farmer who has been doing farming all of his life, he can still do farming using his hands. It's difficult, but it can be done. But say if the farmer has a tractor, then it's a good to have thing. And that's what tools usually play a role. That's what is the actual role of tools in DevOps. It's a good to have. It makes things easier. But is DevOps all about tools? No. Tools are a part of DevOps, an important and integral part of DevOps, but they are not the whole DevOps. So this is an example that we were talking about earlier where I said you have one line of code. So you have something called a chef right now. So you just type in a code from a workstation, hit enter. It gets deployed from chef server to the chef server, and from chef server, it gets deployed to all the nodes or all the servers. This is how continuous delivery happens using tools. So we start from code using GitHub, and then we do a build using Jenkins. We do test, then we do release, then we have deploy using Puppet Labs. Then all of that gets stored onto the cloud using AWS, and then we have monitoring tool which is called as New Relic. So this is a again a DevOps environment that is out there which is related to tools. How are tools helping at different stages of a project? So we talked about silos, the operation silo being there, but what we are seeing is now every organization having a DevOps team or a DevOps part into the organization. So the problem now has become is that we were trying to remove a silo, but now we are generating a new silo called as DevOps. So let's not introduce a new silo, and that's where this webinar comes into picture that hey, the approach to DevOps or the thinking for DevOps should be in a different way. We should not introduce silos, but we should be removing silos and reducing silos. This is the DevOps advantage that so waterfall between waterfall, agile, and DevOps. So you see at the end it does a lot of things like promote continuous build, it promote continuous delivery, promotes immutable environment, non-functional requirement, health checks. I completely agree with the aspect that this is all possible because of the tools and all of this, but we have to again realize, as I keep on repeating again and again, you know what, get people to understand what actual DevOps is all about. So why would DevOps fail and why does it fail? So usually lack of trust. Again, it comes from that silo perspective of a trust being there between development team and the ops team. Requires real change. So it's again as agile is, it requires a buy-in from the top management. It's not just like you decide that we are going to implement DevOps in our project and that's what is going to happen. First of all, it requires buy-in from your management, so they need to change. Secondly, as I mentioned, it's all about following the T model. Instead of being an I model and following that, we have to follow the T model. And coming to the T model is a change which a lot of people refuse to accept. So it certainly requires real change. It's a methodology and culture, not a product. That's what we have to realize. We are treating it as a product right now, and that's where we are getting a silos. We are getting a new silo. We are introducing a new silo, and it takes time. So actual DevOps implementation takes about 5 to 6 months We have a lot of component, lot of aspects that needs to be working together for it to succeed. We have tools available. We have, though the tools are free and available over internet, they still have to integrate, and they have to still um, um, work together. So it takes time. So you need to really have patience for DevOps to work. Once it works, it is a beautiful thing to have in your system. But you should have that patience, and that is where DevOps fails. Who is using it? There are a lot of companies, a lot of organizations that are using it right now. So we have Netflix, Walmart, GE, Facebook, some of the prominent organizations that are using DevOps, and it's just a dip in the pond that I would say. Um, it has certainly become a, a large number now because of the advantages that DevOps offers. So conclusion. So what is DevOps? It's actually a combination of development, QA, and technology operations, and that's what actually forms DevOps. So this is what we have to realize what is DevOps all about. So thank you guys. Thank you. It was a pleasure listening or not listening, talking to you guys and creating this webinar. I hope you would like the points that were there, but you can please mention your comments once the video is posted, and we would certainly see, we would certainly look at the comments, and I would certainly like to hear about what you thought about the video and what do you thought about the concept that we were talking about. So thank you. It was really nice talking to you all. Um, we'll be back soon with another video. So thank you all again.